Welcome to Sinister States.
Welcome, Sleepy One. Tonight, I'll be your guide through shadows and secrets, a companion as we wander into places where the night is not just dark, but alive. Before we begin, take a breath, settle in, and remember, some places are better left undisturbed. Our first stop is Black Hollow, a forest that locals in upstate Maine call the Whispering Pines. They say the trees there remember every secret ever spoken beneath their boughs, and they whisper them back to anyone foolish enough to listen after dark. That I first heard about Black Hollow from my grandfather, a man who never believed in ghosts but always locked his doors before sunset. He'd grown up in a cabin on the edge of the woods, and as a boy, I'd beg him for stories. He'd always say the same thing. Some woods are older than memory, and some memories are better left alone. I thought he was just trying to scare me, but the older I got, the more I realized he was warning me that it was the summer I turned 21 when I finally decided to see Black Hollow for myself. I was home from college, restless, and convinced that the world was smaller and safer than the stories made it seem. My friend Mason was the only one who agreed to come with me. He was the kind of guy who laughed at danger, who thought every warning was just a dare. We packed flashlights, snacks, and a flask of whiskey, and set out just as the sun dipped behind the pines. The first thing you notice about Black Hollow is the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but a heavy, waiting quiet that presses against your skin. The trees are so close together that even in daylight, the ground is shadowed. At night, it's like stepping into a different world, a world where the rules you know don't apply. We followed the old logging trail, our flashlights cutting thin lines through the darkness. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Every so often, we'd hear a branch snap or the rustle of something moving just out of sight. Mason joked about bears and wolves, but his voice was too loud, too forced. I could feel the tension in his steps, the way he kept glancing over his shoulder. About a mile in, we found the clearing my grandfather had described, a circle of bare earth where nothing grew, not even moss. In the center stood a single, dead pine, its bark stripped away, its branches reaching up like broken fingers. Mason wanted to take a selfie, but I stopped him. I don't know why. Maybe it was the way the air felt colder in that clearing, or the way the silence seemed to deepen, as if the forest was holding its breath. That's when we heard it. A whisper, soft and indistinct, like someone speaking just behind us. We spun around, flashlights darting through the trees, but there was nothing there. The whisper came again, clearer this time. A woman's voice, low and urgent. "Go home," she said. "Go home before it's too late." Mason laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "Probably just the wind," he said, but his hand was shaking. I wanted to leave, but pride kept me rooted. I told myself it was just nerves, that the stories were getting to me. But then the whisper changed. It started repeating our names, first mine, then Mason's, over and over, each time a little louder, a little closer that we ran. I don't remember making the decision. I just remember the panic, the way the trees seemed to close in, the way the path twisted and doubled back on itself. The whisper followed us, growing sharper, angrier. "You shouldn't be here," it hissed. "You don't belong." We burst out of the woods just as the first light of dawn touched the sky. We didn't speak on the drive home. Mason never laughed about Black Hollow again. He moved away that fall, and we lost touch. I tried to forget what happened, to convince myself it was just fear and imagination. But sometimes, late at night, I hear my name whispered in the wind, and I remember the feeling of being watched, of being known. Years later, I found an old newspaper clipping in my grandfather's attic. It was about a woman who'd gone missing in Black Hollow in 1952. Her name was Evelyn Mason. No one ever found her body, but locals said you could still hear her calling for help on quiet nights. I never told Mason about it. Some secrets are better left buried. If you ever find yourself near Black Hollow, remember this: the trees are listening. And if you hear your name whispered in the dark, don't answer. Just run. There's a place on the outskirts of my hometown that everyone knows, but no one talks about. Granger Hill rises above the city like a broken tooth, its slopes tangled with weeds and wild roses. At the top sits the old asylum, a crumbling brick building with boarded windows and a roof that sags under the weight of 100 years of secrets. The sign out front is long gone, but the iron gates still stand, rusted and locked, as if they're trying to keep something in or keep us out. I first saw the asylum when I was 8, riding in the back seat of my mother's car. She told me to close my eyes as we passed, but I peeked through my fingers and saw the silhouette of the building against the sky, its windows like empty eyes. I asked her why it was empty, and she just shook her head. Some places are better left alone, she said, especially after dark. But curiosity is a stubborn thing, and by the time I was 17, the asylum had become a dare among my friends. We'd tell stories at parties about the patients who'd vanished, the doctors who'd gone mad, the lights that flickered in the windows long after the last caretaker left. No one ever admitted to going up there at night, but everyone claimed to know someone who had. It was the summer before college when I finally gave in. My best friend, Jamie, was leaving for the army, and we wanted one last adventure. We waited until midnight, then climbed the hill with flashlights and a bolt cutter Jamie had borrowed from his dad's garage. The air was thick with the smell of rain and wildflowers, and the city lights below looked small and far away. The gates groaned as we forced them open, the sound echoing through the night. The front doors were chained shut, but a broken window around the side gave us a way in. Inside, the air was cold and stale, heavy with dust and something sweeter, like old medicine or rotting fruit. Our footsteps echoed down the tiled halls, and every shadow seemed to twitch at the edge of our lights. We found the old records room first, its shelves still lined with yellowed files and cracked leather binders. Jamie started reading names out loud, making up stories about the people who'd lived and died here. I tried to laugh, but my voice sounded thin. There was a feeling in the air, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. As if the building itself was holding its breath, we wandered deeper, past peeling murals and rusted gurneys, until we reached the main ward. The doors hung crooked on their hinges, and the walls were covered in graffiti, names, dates, warnings scrawled in black marker. "Don't look in the mirrors," one message read. "Don't answer if they call your name." Jamie found a cracked mirror in one of the rooms and dared me to look. I hesitated, remembering the stories, but pride got the better of me. I stared into the glass, my flashlight beam bouncing off the surface. For a moment, all I saw was my own reflection, pale, wide-eyed, hair plastered to my forehead with sweat. Then, behind me, a shadow moved. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. Jamie laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "Probably just a rat," he said, but his hand was shaking. We decided to leave, but the way back seemed longer, the halls twisting in ways I didn't remember. The air grew colder, and the silence pressed in, broken only by the sound of our breathing. That's when we heard it, a voice, soft and distant, calling Jamie's name. He froze, his face draining of color. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart pounding. The voice came again, closer this time, echoing down the hall. "Jamie, Jamie." We ran, stumbling over debris, our flashlights flickering. The voice followed us, growing louder, more insistent. "Jamie, come back." It sounded like a woman, her tone pleading, desperate. Jamie stopped, his eyes wide with fear. "That's my mom," he whispered. "But she's dead." I grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the window. We scrambled out, cutting our hands on the broken glass, and tumbled down the hill. The voice faded behind us, replaced by the sound of our own ragged breathing. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of the streetlights. Jamie never spoke about that night again. He left for the army the next week, and I haven't seen him since. Sometimes I wonder if he ever hears that voice in his dreams, calling him back to the asylum on Granger Hill. I drive past the hill sometimes, the asylum still looming above the city, its windows dark and empty. But every so often, I see a flicker of light in the records room, or a shadow moving behind the glass. I remember the warning on the wall, "Don't answer if they call your name." I keep my windows rolled up and my eyes on the road. If you ever find yourself near Granger Hill after dark, remember this: some voices are better left unanswered, and some places are better left alone. There's a stretch of railroad that cuts through the marshes outside Marrow's End, a town so small it barely appears on maps. The tracks haven't seen a train in decades, but the rails are still there, rusted and half swallowed by reeds and mud. Locals call it the Devil's Line, and they say if you walk it after dark, you'll never find your way back. Some say you'll hear the whistle of a ghost train, others that you'll meet the conductor who collects lost souls. I never believed any of it, until the night I tried to prove them wrong that I was 19, home for the summer, restless and angry at the world. My father had just lost his job at the mill, and the house was thick with silence and disappointment. I spent my days working odd jobs and my nights wandering the back roads with my cousin Eli. He was 2 years older, wild and fearless, the kind of person who made trouble look like an art form. It was Eli who first suggested we walk the tracks. "Come on," he said, grinning as he flicked his lighter open and closed. "Let's see if the Devil's Line is as scary as everyone says. Bet you $5 we make it to the old trestle and back before midnight." I agreed, more out of pride than curiosity. We set out just after sunset, flashlights in hand, the air thick with the smell of mud and wildflowers. The marsh was alive with the sound of frogs and crickets, but as we reached the tracks, the noise faded, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. The rails stretched ahead, straight as a knife, vanishing into the darkness. We walked in single file, our footsteps echoing on the wooden ties. The air grew colder, and a thin mist began to rise from the marsh, curling around our ankles. Eli laughed, but his voice sounded small, swallowed by the night. About a mile in, we reached the old signal tower, its windows shattered, the paint peeling in long, curling strips. Eli dared me to climb up, but I shook my head. There was something about the place that felt wrong, as if the air itself was watching us. We pressed on, the mist growing thicker, our flashlights barely piercing the gloom. That's when we heard it, a distant whistle, low and mournful, echoing across the marsh. Eli stopped, his grin faltering. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart pounding. The whistle came again, closer this time, followed by the faint clatter of wheels on rails. "There's no train," I said, trying to sound brave. "The line's been dead for years." Eli shrugged, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Maybe it's just the wind," he said, but his voice was shaky. We kept walking, the sound of the phantom train growing louder, the ground trembling beneath our feet that we reached the trestle, a narrow bridge of rotting wood and rusted steel, spanning a black, sluggish river. The mist was so thick now that we could barely see the other side. Eli stepped onto the bridge, but I hesitated. The whistle sounded again, so close it made my bones ache. Suddenly, the air was filled with the roar of an oncoming train, lights blazing, wheels screaming on the rails. I froze, blinded by the glare, the sound so loud it drowned out my own thoughts. Eli screamed, reaching for me, but his hand slipped through mine. The train thundered past, a blur of shadow and light, and then silence. I opened my eyes to find myself alone on the tracks, the mist swirling around me. Eli was gone. I called his name, my voice echoing into the darkness. but there was no answer. I ran back along the tracks, stumbling over ties and stones, my flashlight flickering. The marsh seemed endless, the path twisting in ways I didn't remember. When I finally reached the road, the sky was pale with dawn. I collapsed on the shoulder, gasping for breath, my clothes soaked with dew. Eli was never found. The police searched the marsh, dragged the river, but there was no trace, no footprints, no blood, nothing but the memory of that ghostly whistle. I left Marrow's End that fall, but the tracks still haunt my dreams. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the distant sound of a train, and I remember the look on Eli's face as the mist swallowed him. I know now why the locals warn against walking the Devil's Line after dark. Some places remember every step, every secret, every soul lost to the night. If you ever find yourself near Marrow's End, stay away from the tracks after sunset. And if you hear the whistle of a train that shouldn't exist, don't look back. Just run. There's a building in the heart of the city that everyone pretends not to see. The Briarcliff Hotel stands 12 stories tall, its once grand facade now stained with rain and time. Every window is broken, every door chained shut, but at night, if you look up from the street, you'll see lights flickering behind the shattered glass. Some say it's squatters, others say it's ghosts. But the truth is, no one who's gone inside after dark has ever come out the same. I first heard about Briarcliff from my older sister, Lena. She was always chasing the next thrill, the next story to tell her friends. She'd sneak out at night, daring herself to go where no one else would. I was 15 the summer she disappeared, and I still remember the last thing she said to me. "Don't ever go into Briarcliff after dark. Promise me, okay?" I promised, but promises are easy to break when you're desperate for answers. It was 2 years later when I finally worked up the courage. My parents had moved on, or at least pretended to. The police had given up, filing Lena's case away with all the other missing kids. But I couldn't let it go. I needed to know what happened to her, needed to see for myself what secrets the hotel was hiding. I waited until midnight, then slipped out of the house with a flashlight and a crowbar. The city was quiet, the streets slick with rain. Briarcliff loomed above me, its windows like empty eyes. I circled the building, looking for a way in, and found a basement window pried open just enough to squeeze through. Inside, the air was thick with dust and mold. My flashlight beam danced across peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. Every step echoed, the sound swallowed by the darkness. I moved slowly, calling Lena's name in a whisper, half hoping, half dreading an answer. The lobby was a ruin of marble and glass, the chandelier hanging by a single wire. I climbed the grand staircase, my footsteps muffled by a thick layer of dust. On the second floor, I found a trail of footprints, small, like Lena's, leading down a long hallway. I followed them, my heart pounding, until I reached room 217. The door was ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. Inside, the room was untouched by time. The bed was made, the curtains drawn, a single lamp glowing on the nightstand. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. The air grew cold, and the shadows deepened. I heard a voice, soft, familiar, calling my name. "Sam, Sam, help me." It was Lena. I spun around, searching the room, but she was nowhere to be seen. The voice came again, closer this time, desperate. "Sam, please." I ran to the door, but it wouldn't budge. The lamp flickered, casting strange shapes on the walls. I saw movement in the mirror, a figure, thin and pale, with eyes too large for her face. She reached out, her fingers brushing the glass. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in my head. I stumbled back, tripping over the rug. The room seemed to close in, the walls pulsing with shadows. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. Someone, or something, was coming. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, But the only answer was the sound of glass shattering. Suddenly, the room was filled with light. The door flew open, and I tumbled into the hallway. The air was thick with smoke, the sound of sirens wailing in the distance. I ran down the stairs, out into the street, gasping for breath. The hotel burned for hours, flames licking at the sky. The fire department said it was arson, but no one ever found out who started it. They never found Lena, either. But sometimes, late at night, I see her face in the broken windows, her eyes pleading for help. I don't go near Briarcliff anymore. The building is gone, but the shadows remain. If you ever find yourself on that street after dark, keep your eyes on the ground. And if you hear someone calling your name from the ruins, don't answer. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. There's a legend in the town of Willow Lake, whispered by old men in the bait shop and passed down in hushed tones at sleepovers. They say that beneath the still, black water at the edge of town lies the steeple of a church, its bell forever silent, its doors forever closed. The church was flooded decades ago when the dam was built, and the lake swallowed the valley whole. But on certain nights, when the moon is high and the wind is still, you can see the tip of the steeple breaking the surface, and if you're foolish enough to row out there after dark, you might hear the bell toll, calling you down into the depths. I never believed the stories. I grew up on Willow Lake, swimming in its cool waters every summer, fishing from the dock with my father, skipping stones with my friends. The lake was a part of me, as familiar as my own heartbeat. But there was always a line we didn't cross. No one swam after sunset, and no one, not even the bravest, rowed out to the center at night. It was the summer after high school when I broke the rule. My best friend, Tyler, was leaving for college in the fall, and we wanted one last adventure. We sat on the dock, feet dangling in the water, watching the moon rise over the trees. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the distant hum of crickets. Tyler nudged me, a mischievous grin on his face. "Let's do it," he said. "Let's row out to the steeple. Just once. For the story." I hesitated, remembering the warnings, but the thought of saying goodbye to Tyler made me reckless. We dragged the old rowboat from the shed, its paint peeling, its oars splintered with age. The water was glassy, reflecting the moon and stars. We pushed off, the boat gliding silently into the darkness. The lake was different at night. The familiar shoreline faded into shadow, and the water seemed endless. Every splash of the oars echoed, and the air grew colder as we neared the center. Tyler kept his flashlight pointed at the water, searching for the steeple. I tried to laugh, but the sound died in my throat. After what felt like hours, we saw it, a dark shape rising from the water, the tip of the steeple just visible above the surface. Tyler whooped, raising his arms in triumph. "Told you it was real," he shouted. We drifted closer, the boat rocking gently. The steeple was covered in moss and algae, the wood swollen and warped by years underwater. Tyler reached out, his fingers brushing the rough surface. That's when we heard it, a deep, resonant toll, like a bell ringing from beneath the lake. The sound vibrated through the water, through the boat, through my bones. Tyler's grin faded, replaced by a look of fear. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, the water around the boat began to ripple, as if something was moving beneath us. The air grew colder, and a thick fog rolled across the lake, swallowing the moonlight. I grabbed the oars, desperate to get back to shore, but the boat wouldn't move. It felt as if invisible hands were holding us in place. The bell tolled again, louder this time, and I saw shapes moving in the fog, pale faces, eyes wide and empty, reaching out from the water. Tyler screamed, trying to push them away, but his hands passed through them like mist. The boat rocked violently, and I lost my grip on the oars. Suddenly, the water surged, and the boat tipped, throwing us into the lake. The cold was shocking, paralyzing. I kicked and thrashed, searching for the surface, but something tangled around my legs, pulling me down. I opened my eyes and saw the church below, its doors wide open, the bell swinging in the steeple. Tyler was beside me, his mouth open in a silent scream, his eyes locked on mine. I don't remember how I got back to shore. I woke up on the dock, coughing up lake water, the sun just beginning to rise. Tyler was gone. The rowboat was floating upside down near the center of the lake, the steeple nowhere to be seen. The police searched for days, but they never found him. Some said he ran away. Others whispered that the lake had claimed him, just like it claimed the church. I moved away that fall, but the memory of that night follows me. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear the bell tolling, calling me back to the water. If you ever find yourself at Willow Lake after dark, stay on the shore. And if you hear the bell, don't look back. Some places are meant to be forgotten. There's secrets left to sleep beneath the surface. There's a stretch of highway in the Midwest that locals call Raven's Crossing, though you won't find that name on any map. It's just a lonely, two-lane road cutting through endless fields of corn and soy, the kind of place where the sky feels too big and the world too empty. But everyone in the nearby towns knows the stories. Cars that vanish without a trace, travelers who walk into the night and are never seen again, and the blackbirds that gather on the power lines, watching, waiting. They say if you drive Raven's Crossing after midnight, you might not make it to the other side. I never believed in haunted roads. I grew up in a family of truckers, people who trusted engines and asphalt more than old wives' tales. My father used to say, "The only thing to fear on the road is falling asleep at the wheel." But that was before the night I lost him, and before I learned that some roads remember every secret, every sorrow, every soul that's passed through. It was late October, the air sharp with the promise of frost. I was driving home from college, my car packed with laundry and textbooks, the radio playing static between distant stations. I'd taken the back roads to avoid construction, trusting my GPS to guide me. The sun had set hours ago, and the world outside my headlights was nothing but darkness and the occasional flash of a deer's eyes. That I was almost through the last stretch of fields when I saw the sign. Raven's Crossing, next 12 miles. The letters were faded, the sign half swallowed by weeds. I hesitated, remembering the stories, but the GPS insisted this was the fastest route. I pressed on, telling myself I was too old to be scared of shadows. The road narrowed, the fields pressing in on either side. The only sound was the hum of my tires and the soft tap of rain on the windshield. I passed an old farmhouse, its windows dark, a single porch light flickering in the wind. A flock of ravens scattered as I drove by, their wings beating against the night. About halfway through, my headlights caught something in the road. A figure, standing perfectly still. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. It was a woman, dressed in a long, dark coat, her hair tangled by the wind. She stared at me, her eyes reflecting the light like a cat's. That I rolled down the window, my voice shaking. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed down the road. I followed her gaze, but there was nothing there, just more darkness, more empty fields. When I looked back, she was gone. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm my nerves. The radio crackled, a burst of static that sounded almost like a voice. I turned it off and kept driving, my hands tied on the wheel. The road seemed to stretch on forever, the fields blurring together. I passed another sign, identical to the first. Raven's Crossing, next 12 miles. My stomach twisted. I checked the GPS, but it showed me moving in circles, the little blue dot spinning on the screen. Panic set in. I turned around, trying to retrace my route, but every landmark looked the same. The farmhouse, the flickering porch light, the flock of ravens, all repeating, over and over. The woman appeared again, standing in the middle of the road, her eyes hollow and accusing. I stopped the car, too afraid to move. She approached, her footsteps silent on the wet pavement. She leaned in close, her breath fogging the glass. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Not after dark." I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. She reached through the window, her hand icy cold, and pressed something into my palm, a small, black feather. "Remember," she said, "not all who wander are lost. Some are taken." She vanished, and the world snapped back into focus. The road was empty, the field silent. My GPS beeped, recalculating, and suddenly I was only a mile from the highway. I drove the rest of the way in silence, the feather clutched in my hand. I never told anyone what happened that night. My father's truck was found abandoned on Ravens Crossing years before, the cab empty, the engine still running. They never found him. Sometimes, when I drive at night, I see a woman in a dark coat standing by the side of the road, watching, waiting. I keep my eyes on the asphalt and my hands on the wheel. If you ever find yourself on Ravens Crossing after midnight, don't stop for anyone. And if you see the ravens gathering, turn back. Some roads are meant to be traveled only in daylight. There's secrets left to the darkness. There's a playground at the edge of Ashwood Park, tucked behind a row of ancient oaks and half swallowed by weeds. The swings creak in the wind, the merry-go-round is rusted and still, and the slide is so overgrown with ivy that it looks more like a ruin than a place for children. The city stopped maintaining it years ago, after the last of the neighborhood families moved away. But the real reason no one goes there after dark isn't the broken equipment or the wild grass. It's the stories. They say the playground is haunted by the laughter of children who never came home, and that if you hear the swings moving at midnight, you should run and never look back. That I grew up 3 blocks from Ashwood Park. As a kid, I'd ride my bike past the playground, always speeding up when I reached the corner where the shadows seemed to gather. My mother warned me to stay away, especially after sunset. "That place isn't safe," she'd say, her voice tight. "Not for anyone, but especially not for you." I never understood what she meant, but I listened, until the night I didn't. It was the summer I turned 16, the year my best friend, Jamie, disappeared. He was the kind of kid who never sat still, always chasing after stray dogs or climbing trees no one else dared. The night he vanished, he told me he was going to the playground to prove it wasn't haunted. "Come with me," he said, grinning. "We'll stay until midnight, just to say we did." I wanted to say no, but I was tired of being afraid, tired of feeling like a child in a world that expected me to grow up. We met at the park just after 11, flashlights in hand, our breath fogging in the cool night air. The playground looked different in the dark, smaller, somehow, but also more menacing. The swings moved in the breeze, their chains groaning. Jamie laughed, pushing one of the swings so hard it spun around the top bar. "See," he said, "nothing to be scared of." We sat on the merry-go-round, spinning slowly, talking about school and girls and what we'd do when we finally left this town. Midnight crept closer, and the air grew colder. The streetlights flickered, and the shadows seemed to stretch across the grass. That's when we heard it, a soft giggle, high and clear, coming from the far end of the playground. Jamie froze, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart pounding. The giggle came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of footsteps crunching in the gravel. We shone our flashlights toward the slide, but there was nothing there, just the tangled ivy and the empty night. Suddenly, the swings began to move, not with the wind, but as if something was sitting in them. The chains rattled, the seats rising and falling in perfect rhythm. The giggles grew louder, joined by whispers and the faint sound of a jump rope slapping the ground. Jamie stood up, his voice shaking. "Let's go," he said. But as we turned to leave, a figure stepped out from behind the slide. A little girl, no older than 7, her dress torn and dirty, her hair hanging in tangled knots. She stared at us, her eyes dark and empty. "Don't go," she said, her voice echoing across the playground. "Stay and play with us." I tried to move, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. Jamie reached for my arm, but the girl shook her head. "He can't leave," she whispered. "He promised." The world seemed to tilt, the playground spinning around us. The giggles turned to screams, the swings twisting in the air, the merry-go-round spinning faster and faster. I closed my eyes, covering my ears, desperate to block out the noise. When I opened them, the sun was rising, and the playground was empty. Jamie was gone. The only sign he'd ever been there was his flashlight, lying in the grass beside the slide. I ran home, my mind reeling, my heart broken. The police searched for weeks, but they never found him. My mother held me tight, her eyes full of fear and sorrow. "I told you not to go," she whispered. "Some places remember. Some places never let go." I moved away after graduation, but I still dream of that night. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I hear the sound of swings creaking, the laughter of children lost to the dark. If you ever find yourself near Ashwood Park after sunset, keep walking. And if you hear someone ask you to play, don't answer. Some games never end. Beneath the cracked sidewalks and leaning brick buildings of Old Mill Town, there's a network of tunnels that most people have forgotten. They were built a century ago, back when the mills ran day and night and the town was alive with the clatter of looms and the shouts of workers. The tunnels carried steam and coal, and sometimes, when the river flooded, they carried water and worse. Now, the mills are silent, the factories boarded up, and the tunnels are nothing but a rumor, a place where the past lingers and the present dares not tread. But every so often, someone goes missing, and the old folks shake their heads and say, they must have gone down below. Nobody comes back from the tunnels after dark. I never planned to go down there. I was a history major home for the summer, working on a project about the town's industrial past. My grandfather used to tell me stories about the tunnels, how he and his friends would sneak down there as kids, daring each other to go deeper, always running back before the sun set. "It's not the dark you have to worry about," he'd say, his eyes distant. "It's what the dark remembers." I thought he was just trying to scare me. But the more I researched, the more I realized how much of the town's history was buried beneath our feet. Old blueprints showed entrances in the basements of abandoned mills, in the root cellars of forgotten houses, even in the storm drains that emptied into the river. I became obsessed, convinced that if I could map the tunnels, I'd find the missing piece for my project, and maybe, just maybe, the answer to the town's oldest mysteries. The IT was late July when I found the entrance. The old textile mill on River Street had been condemned for years, its windows shattered, its doors chained shut. But a storm had washed out part of the foundation, revealing a narrow opening just big enough to squeeze through. I waited until dusk, my backpack loaded with a flashlight, a notebook, and a bottle of water. I told myself I'd only go a few yards in, just enough to get a sense of the place. The air inside was cool and damp, thick with the smell of earth and rust. My flashlight beam danced across brick walls slick with condensation, old pipes snaking overhead. The tunnel sloped downward, the sound of dripping water echoing in the darkness. I moved slowly, marking my path with chalk, my heart pounding with every step. After a few minutes, I reached a junction, 3 tunnels branching off in different directions. I chose the left, following the faint sound of running water. The walls were covered in graffiti, names and dates stretching back decades. Some were crossed out, others circled in red. I tried not to think about what that meant. The tunnel twisted and turned, the air growing colder. My flashlight flickered, and I stopped to check the batteries. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, like someone calling my name from far away. I froze, listening. The whisper came again, closer this time, echoing off the walls. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe water running through the pipes. But the sound grew louder, more insistent. I turned to leave, but the tunnel behind me looked different, narrower, the walls closer together. My chalk marks were gone, washed away by some unseen hand. Panic set in. I moved faster, my footsteps echoing, the whisper following me, growing sharper, angrier. Suddenly, my flashlight died, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal, no light. The whisper became a chorus, voices overlapping, pleading, accusing. I stumbled forward, hands outstretched, searching for a wall, a door, anything. My fingers brushed something cold and wet, a hand, gripping mine with desperate strength. I screamed, pulling away, but the hand held tight. "Don't leave me." A voice whispered, so close I could feel its breath on my ear. "Stay with us. It's so dark down here." I broke free, running blindly. The voices chasing me, the tunnel twisting and narrowing. I tripped, fell, and rolled down a steep slope, landing hard on a pile of rubble. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, slowly, I realized I could see a faint light, a crack in the wall, just big enough to crawl through. I dragged myself toward it, squeezing through the gap, and tumbled out into the night air. I was behind the mill, the river rushing past, the sky just beginning to lighten with dawn. My clothes were torn, my hands bleeding, my notebook gone. I never finished my project. I never went back to the tunnels. But sometimes, when I walk past the old mill, I hear whispers rising from the storm drains, voices calling out for help, for company, for escape. If you ever find yourself in Old Mill Town after dark, stay above ground. And if you hear your name echoing from below, don't answer. Some places are better left in silence. There's secrets buried with the past. There's a hill on the edge of the old coastal town where I grew up, a place the locals call Lantern Hill. It rises above the harbor, crowned by a crumbling stone tower that once served as a lighthouse. The light went out decades ago, but the tower still stands, its windows black and empty, its door chained shut. The path up the hill is overgrown, the stones slick with moss, and the air always seems colder there, even in summer. People say the tower is haunted by the Watcher, a figure seen pacing the lantern room at night, holding a flickering light that never quite chases away the dark. They say if you climb Lantern Hill after sunset, the Watcher will find you, and you'll never come down the same. I never believed the stories. My father was the town's harbor master, a practical man who scoffed at talk of ghosts and curses. He used to take me up the hill on Sunday mornings, showing me the view of the bay, the fishing boats bobbing in the water, the gulls wheeling overhead. "It's just a tower," he'd say, ruffling my hair. "Nothing up there but old stones and seagull nests." But he never took me up after dark. The summer I turned 18, everything changed. My father died suddenly, a heart attack that left me reeling. The town felt smaller, emptier, and the house was too quiet. I started walking at night, wandering the empty streets, drawn again and again to the foot of Lantern Hill. I'd stand at the bottom, staring up at the tower, watching for the light that everyone talked about, but no one could explain. One night, just after midnight, I saw it, a pale glow in the lantern room, moving back and forth like someone searching for something. I told myself it was just a trick of the moon, or maybe a flashlight from some other restless soul. But the next night, the light was there again, and the next, and the next. Curiosity got the better of me. I decided to climb the hill. The path was steeper than I remembered, the grass wet with dew, the air thick with the smell of salt and seaweed. The town below was silent, the only sound the distant crash of waves against the rocks. As I neared the tower, the light in the lantern room flickered, then vanished. I hesitated, heart pounding, but pride pushed me forward. The tower door was chained, but the wood was old and rotten. I pried it open with a rock, the chain clattering to the ground. Inside, the air was cold and damp, the stone walls slick with moisture. My footsteps echoed as I climbed the spiral staircase, each step creaking under my weight at the top. The lantern room was empty, the glass cracked and fogged with age. I stepped out onto the narrow balcony, the wind whipping at my clothes. The view was breathtaking, the town spread out below, the harbor shining in the moonlight, the endless black of the sea beyond. For a moment, I felt foolish for being afraid. Then I saw him, a figure standing at the edge of the balcony, his back to me, holding a lantern that glowed with a sickly, greenish light. He was tall and thin, his clothes tattered, his hair wild and matted. He didn't turn as I approached, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and empty. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised the lantern, the light flaring brighter, casting strange shadows on the walls. The air grew colder, the wind howling around us. I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. The watcher turned, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes black as the sea. He stared at me, and I felt a wave of sorrow and longing so deep it nearly knocked me to my knees. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice echoing with the sound of distant waves. "This place remembers. This place keeps what it finds." I tried to speak, to apologize, but the words stuck in my throat. The watcher stepped closer, the lantern swinging between us. The light flickered, and for a moment, I saw faces in the glass, dozens of them, eyes wide with fear, mouths open in silent screams. I realized then that I wasn't the first to climb Lantern Hill after dark, and I wouldn't be the last. The watcher reached out, his hand cold as ice, and pressed the lantern into my chest. "Carry the light," he whispered. "Remember what you've seen." The world spun, the wind roaring in my ears. When I opened my eyes, I was standing at the foot of the hill, the first light of dawn breaking over the harbor. My clothes were damp, my hands shaking, and in my pocket was a small, cold lantern, its flame barely visible. I never climbed Lantern Hill again. I left town that fall, but the memory of that night follows me. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the watcher's face, feel the weight of the lantern in my hands. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in off the sea, I see a pale light moving in the tower, pacing back and forth, searching for something lost. If you ever find yourself in my town after dark, stay away from Lantern Hill. And if you see a light in the tower, don't follow it. Some places are meant to be left in darkness. They're secrets kept by those who watch and wait.